So, hi, I'm Becca with Heathen Urban Homesteaders. And yeah, today I need to can corned beef. I can speak. Um, Corned beef has been on sale because, it's March and happy St. Patrick's Day. This is the only time of the year that corned beef goes on sale. So, usually this month, um, I'm canning a lot of corned beef. My goal this year is 50 quarts ish. I want to make sure that we have enough to at least have like 1 quart of corned beef a week for the next year until it goes on sale again. Um, I have plans and hopes to figure out how to corn beef brisket myself, and I will probably be attempting that at some point in time this summer, but I don't know how that will come out. There's no guarantees that it will even be edible. And so, with that being said, I want to make sure that if corning it myself fails, I still have um, plenty of corned beef on hand for corned beef hash, and I'll probably throw a couple of these briskets in the freezer just to have them for, the random afternoon that we decide we want to have corned beef and cabbage. Yeah, so anyway, I always buy just the, I prefer the point cut to the flat cut. Um, the point cut's usually cheaper, but it's also marbled much better. The fat in it is better than the other cuts. Um, and I try not to get anything over a 3 pound brisket, just because the brisket to seasoning ratio, the little packets that they come with, I do use those in my canning as well. Um, and yeah, so basically at this point in time, I'm just cutting everything up. I bought 80 pounds of corned beef briskets, so I'm going to be starting the process of canning all of that today. I will get all of it cut up today. But there's no way I'll get it all canned today. I'll probably have to spend a couple of days canning it. But I want to get it all cubed and get it in my big container. This is a 12 quart, and I have lids for it. But if this ends up not being enough to fit all of the corned beef, then I have more of these, so I might have to fill more than one, or I'll get my big like 20 quart one and fill that one, but we'll see. So basically I just cut these open. I cut the packages open. I have the trash can sitting next to me right over here, so what I always do is I cut open the package, I pull out the brisket and try to keep the juice in the bag. I don't want the extra juice. um, but I'll pull the briskets all out and put them in this big bowl. I'll put the seasoning packets into a jar just to hold them, and then the packaging all gets immediately put into the trash can, which immediately goes to the trash can outside, so that I don't have to worry about liquid leaking or anything like that. This is a raw pack method, so if you don't feel comfortable doing it this way, then you could always potentially save the juice if you wanted to cook your corned beef first and put it in the jar. I don't like doing it that way just because you get a lot of juice out of the corned beef if you raw pack it, so you don't have to worry about adding any water or anything like that. I never add salt to these because obviously it's corned beef, so it's brined. It's got a lot of sodium in it already. So like I said, all I save out of these packages is the meat and the little seasoning packet. The juice gets dumped, as much of it as I can. And basically I do this because this bowl here isn't super big. I usually will try to do like anywhere from 4 to 6 briskets at a time. So I'll fill this bowl up with a bunch of briskets, and then I'll cube them all up, put all the cubes in that, and then do it again. That way, I'm not having to stop in between each brisket to cut open another package and worry about emptying juice and all of that. So that's what I'm doing here. I usually cut this open over this bowl so that if it's a particularly juicy package, it can get caught in the bowl. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to work on now, and I will be back when it's time to start cutting them. Okay, so now that I got all those briskets out of the packages, I've got all of the seasoning packets over here, putting on a new pair of gloves. Not to say that I don't wash my hands in between the gloves, I do. I just have a texture thing about the briskets after they've been in the package with all the stuff they're kind of slimy feeling, and I don't like feeling it. Yeah. So anyway, basically at this point, all I really do is I just cube it up, probably in like 1 inch cubes is about what I do, maybe 1.5 inches. So I cut it into strips first, and then cut the cubes from the strips. Lay the strip flat, and then if I have to cut it in half, I do, just depending on how thick the brisket is where I'm cutting. Use your own judgment. It doesn't have to be perfect, not by any means. I mean, you don't have to pull out a ruler and measure or anything like that, but you do want them all fairly close to the same size. Now, I know this question is going to come up. Somebody's going to ask about the fat cap, which is just the cap of fat on the top of the meat. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. Some people trim it off, especially for canning, because you don't want to worry about fat getting underneath the flats of your jars and then not getting a good seal. I have not ever had that issue, like ever. I don't think I've ever had a failed jar when I canned corned beef. But I keep the fat on because of flavor purposes, and because the fat that does melt during the canning process and rises to the top of the jar when it cools, that little layer of fat you end up getting is great flavor. Most of our jars of corned beef, the stuff I'm doing right now, 99% of it gets used for corned beef hash for breakfast. And I like that little bit of fat on the top because I can pop the jar open and empty out the liquid and then use that little layer of fat on the top as the cooking medium. I can put that in the pot and it'll liquefy and it'll fry up the corned beef really good, and then you end up getting a really good flavor in your potatoes, and you don't have to use as much butter because of it, and it's just great. So for the purposes that I use it for, I do not trim the fat. But if you feel like you need to, by all means, trim the fat. So yeah, I'm just basically coming through and cutting it into what I think looks good. Keep in mind that when you can this, it's meat. It's going to shrink. So you may pack a quart jar as tightly as you possibly can, and when all is said and done and the canning is done, you're going to only have about 3/4 of it full of meat. Just because it does shrink in the cooking process, but that's okay. So these strips here, well, especially this one is quite thick all the way around, so I am just going to kind of sort of cut this one in half this way, just because I feel like I will get some better proportioned size pieces by doing that. And yeah, I am really happy with that. That's a little bit smaller than the rest of the pieces I've cut, but like I said, it's not an exact science. It's not anything you have to do precisely. At least this portion of the canning corned beef does not have to be done precisely. Just as close as you can get them all to each other is what you want. The actual process of canning it, though, that is very precise, and you have to stick with those rules, you know, for safety. You don't want anyone to get sick from eating your food. You don't want to spend all of this time, and really all the money that you spend, you don't want to waste it all on something that's not going to be safe or running the risk of jars not sealing. Because this is meat. It's going to process in a quart jar for 90 minutes. So it's going to be in a pressure cooker, essentially cooking under pressure for an hour and a half. You don't want to have to worry about a jar that hasn't sealed. I mean, you can eat it right away, but imagine if you load your canner with 7 quarts and you don't do it properly, and at the end of an hour and a half, you've got 7 quarts worth of corned beef that hasn't sealed, and so it needs to be eaten within 24 hours. That sucks. So when we get to that portion of this, just make sure you're following the rules and being safe and following the instructions for your canner, because this is a pressure canning recipe. You cannot can corned beef safely in a water bath canner. I have had people tell me, it's like the most annoying thing you can possibly say to me, well, that's not how my grandparents did it. Well, my grandparents have been water bath canning for years and years and years, and it was safe, and nobody ever got sick. How can you know that for sure? How can you know for sure that one year everybody didn't get the stomach flu from that can of something or another that was canned in a water bath canner? Rules change. Regulations change. The way that we do things changes, and it changes for a reason. We know a lot more than we did back then. We know a lot more about germs and parasites and safe food handling practices and all of that. Those things change for a reason. We follow safe canning practices for the most part. I know I'm going to make a video later and somebody's going to say, oh, remember that time you canned corned beef and you said that you follow all the rules? Well, now you're not following the rules. Yes, I do rogue can sometimes for some things. I do can my beans dry, which is not considered a safe practice, but I've never had an issue. And as you learn more about canning and as you get better at it, you will reach a point where you know if you're doing something that's unsafe. If you're not privy to canning right now, but you want to be, you can get there. It's not hard. And canning is like the best way to save money. The best way. Because then when things go on sale, like that super oddball time that the grocery store says, hey, we've got a crap load of this lean ground beef and we need to get rid of it just because we have too much of it. Here, you can buy it at 90 cents a pound. You can go buy 100 pounds of it, spend $90 and have ground beef canned on your shelf for soups or spaghetti or anything like that you want to use it for. And you just saved money, because now when you need that ground beef to make spaghetti one night, you don't have to run to the store and spend $3 a pound for it. You've got it, and it's on your shelf, and it's not taking up freezer space, and it's not taking up refrigerator space. and you can pull out that jar and it's already cooked. And all you have to do is throw it in with some tomato sauce and boil up some noodles, and you've got dinner in next to no time. And there's not nearly as much mess because then you don't have to brown the ground beef and worry about splatters of grease everywhere. So if you're watching this video and you don't can, or you don't know how to can, or you're interested and you want to can, I say do it. I say go all in, because it's probably the best hobby I could have ever picked up, besides sewing. So yeah, anyway, ramble over. I'm just going to cube up all of this brisket that I bought. It's a ridiculous amount. I pulled out these 6 that were in one bag, and I've got 5 more bags in the refrigerator. So math would say I've probably got about 30 briskets to cut up. So yeah, I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna keep cubing these up like I've been doing, opening more packages up, sticking my seasoning over there in that jar, and then once I get everything all cut up, I will bring you guys back, and we'll move on to setting up the canner and getting jars and all of that stuff. But for now, I'm just gonna cut up this brisket, and you'll probably be back in like 30 seconds. Okay, so all the corned beef is cut. I've got all the seasonings over there. This time can. Okay, so I got all my jars set up. I got my canner. I've got water in it. Depending on the pressure canner you have, you gotta follow the directions for how much water actually goes in there. White vinegar for wiping the rims so that there's no grease or fat that might prevent a seal, and then my 2-piece Tatler lids, which are just basically a reusable metal flat. Well, they replace the metal flats. This is reusable. So yeah, that's it. I'm gonna fill the jars. Oh, what I did forget to say is the little packets of seasoning that come with the corned beef, for quarts, I usually do half and half. And because my canner only fits 7, I'll use 3 packets and kind of divide them as evenly as possible. If I end up running out, I actually have corned beef spice mix up in my cabinet if I have to pull that out and use it. Okay, so for packing raw meat, you're going to do just that. You're just going to pack it down as much as you can. You want to leave a 1-inch headspace, which is usually right where this lip is, this bottom ring on the jar is usually where the 1/2 inch mark is, but if you feel like you need to, you can use a ruler to measure your headspace. So that looks good. Everything's pretty much full where I need it to be. Let me take my gloves off. Okay, so basically all the jars are full. I've got a paper towel. I kind of fold it a couple of ways. And then I dip it into my vinegar and wipe every rim super good so that there's no grease or debris to prevent sealing. I'll just use white vinegar because if there is grease, it cuts through it pretty good. I'm not worried about drying it either because it's going to be going in the canner. And then I basically take all my 2-piece lids and slap them on. Rules were just recently changed, or at least I just recently heard of them being changed, that you don't have to sterilize your jars if you are pressure canning them for longer than, I think it's like 10 or 15 minutes. These will be processing for 90 minutes, so we're super good. Every one of these lids is on. Okay, and then basically you just stick the rings on, and I only tighten them until the jar, I don't know if you can see that, probably not. I'll have to do it with one of these jars. So I take my ring and I put it on, because I'm using Tatler lids and not metal lids. I turn it until the jar starts to turn, and then that's as tight as you need for a Tatler lid. Because when we take it out of the canner, we have to tighten it down more while the jar is cool. And the canner is not on currently because I'm canning cold corned beef. I mean, it was sitting in my fridge before I cut it all, so it's all pretty cold. I don't turn the canner on until all of my jars are in there, and then that way all of it can come up to temperature at the same time, and you don't run the risk of broken jars. And then, with the vinegar that's left over, I purposely pulled out this much, because then with the vinegar that's left after I pour it into my canner, because then if anything ends up leaking out of the jars, like meat, fat, anything like that, the vinegar will help cut it so that it doesn't end up making the jars all nasty and cloudy, and it doesn't make the inside of the canner as nasty as it could be. And at this point, you just do what you need to do according to your canner to get it started. And then you're going to have to follow your pressure according to where you live. Because we're based in Colorado, with the altitude, we're supposed to process at 15 pounds of pressure, because this is a weighted gauge canner. So we do 15 pounds of pressure, and time for corned beef, for really any raw packed meat, is 90 minutes. So once this comes up to pressure, we set our timer for 90 minutes, we let it process, and then we're pretty much done. Okay, so I'm back. This is the corned beef I canned yesterday. I only got one round done because I decided to be a little bit lazy. This is what the jars look like. You notice there's quite a bit of liquid in there. That's the liquid that comes out as the corned beef gets cooked. And the jars are a little bit slimy because that's what happens. Some of the fat usually leaks out on me and gets all in the canner, which makes the jars kind of cloudy looking, but I'll put these in a sink with soapy water and actually physically wash all the jars and dry them before I put them away. These are my Tattler lids, and they sealed quite nicely. Really the only difference between the Tattler lids and the metal ones when you're doing your processing is when these get pulled out of your canner, when the processing is done and your canner is cooled and it's time for you to pull your jars out, you pull them out and you tighten the rings. Do not do that with metal flats. With Tattlers, you pull it out, you tighten the ring, you let it sit overnight, 24 hours, whatever, until they're completely 100% cooled inside and out. And then you can take the rings off for storage and just store them without the rings. I've had a couple people ask me before how I label my jars. Using Tattler lids, since these are reusable, you know, I don't want to write on them with Sharpie and then the lids permanently say whatever it is I canned. I buy disposable labels. I order those off of Amazon. And if anyone's interested, I can leave the link to them down below. But I use those, and I don't put them on the Tattler lids because I don't know if you can tell, but there's a raised logo on these, which makes the labels not stick onto the lid very well. So I always just put them on the side of the jar, and they stay put pretty well. I haven't had any issues with the labels falling off if I put them directly on the glass. If you put them on the lid, after about a month, that label will kind of lift and it'll just be sitting on top of your jar, and then if something happens and you grab the jar and you tilt it, that label falls off. So I don't put them on the lids, I put them on the side of the jar. But yeah, so this is the corned beef that was canned. I can run 7 quarts at a time in my canner. I have the All-American 921, and I can run 7 quarts, or I can run between 14 and 16 pints, depending on if I'm using a wide mouth or a regular mouth, or so the manual says. I don't can with regular mouth pints as often as I can with wide mouth pints, but I've been able to get 16 wide mouth pints in the canner and processed no problem. So my goal with the corned beef is to have 50 quarts canned, or that was my original goal at least. And then yesterday I made corned beef hash for breakfast for just Mark and I realized that having some pints on hand probably isn't a bad idea, because that's just right about perfect if I'm just making something for him and I. If I'm making it for the whole family, then obviously I need quarts, and I'll probably end up using 2. But if it's just him and I, pints are nice. So I think this next round, or at least my first round for today, I'm going to run a round of pints. I'll probably go ahead and do 16 pints, and then the rest of the corned beef will be canned into quarts. But yeah, so this was my video on canning corned beef. This is my first official YouTube video. I'm probably not very good at this, but I'm sure over time I'll get better. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment, and I will respond to them as I can. Keep in mind, I have a husband and a dog and 5 children, so time is not always available. But I will answer them as quickly as I can. And if you don't already follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, Heathen Urban Homesteaders, you can pretty much find us on all of them. It's either hashtag or the @sign. Yeah, so see you guys next time.